When Laura and I married 10 years ago, I thought I hit the jackpot. She was brilliant, stunning, and always 10 steps ahead in any conversation. We joked that her mind worked like a chess player's, always calculating her next move. Back then, I thought it was endearing. Now, I wonder if it was a warning I missed. Lately, things have felt off. Started with the small things. She'd always been punctual, but now she's constantly running late from work. Her texts became shorter, less frequent, and she guarded her phone like it held the nuclear codes. She even started locking her home office, something she'd never done before. When I asked her about it, she'd laugh and wave me off. "Big project at work," she said. "You know how it is. More responsibilities mean less free time." She threw in a kiss for good measure, but the explanation didn't sit right with me. Then there were the packages. Big, heavy ones that arrived almost weekly, addressed only to her. She wouldn't even let me touch them. "Just work stuff," she'd say, smiling tightly before disappearing into her office with them. I tried to shake off my suspicions. I mean, we've been through rough patches before. Every marriage has them, right? But then she started wearing new jewelry, pieces I'd never seen before, and not ones I could afford on my paycheck. "Just some stuff I found on sale," she said when I asked about the emerald necklace glinting against her throat one night. Her tone was dismissive, the kind of tone that told me not to push. And I didn't. At least not right away. It wasn't until last Thursday, when I found myself eating dinner alone again while Laura was working late, that I realized I couldn't keep brushing this off. Something was wrong, something bigger than just a stressful job. That night, after I cleaned up the kitchen, I opened her laptop. I knew it was wrong, invading her privacy like that, but I couldn't help myself. I needed answers. The laptop was locked, of course. Password I didn't know. That was new. Laura and I had always been open about our devices before. I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour before shutting it and walking away. I wasn't ready to cross that line yet, but I could feel it, the shadow of doubt looming larger every day. And I knew it was only a matter of time before I'd have to step into it and find out what was hiding in the dark. The weekend came and Laura was her usual self. Laughing, teasing, acting like the wife I married. If there were cracks in her mask, she didn't let them show. We spent Sunday morning gardening, one of the few hobbies we both enjoyed. As I pulled weeds, Laura hummed softly. A tune I couldn't place but one she seemed to know by heart. "You're distracted," she said suddenly, tilting her head to look at me. "What's on your mind?" "Work," I lied. "The Anderson account is dragging on longer than I thought." She smiled sympathetically. "You need to stop letting them walk all over you, Adam. You're too nice." There it was again, that hint of condescension she'd developed over the years. It was subtle, like a whisper in the wind, but I'd started noticing it more and more. She didn't respect me like she used to. That evening, when she went to bed early claiming a headache, I stayed up in the living room, staring at the flickering TV without really watching. My gut told me something was wrong. I needed answers. I decided to try her laptop again. This time, I didn't hesitate. After all, I had access to her old passwords. She'd used the same rotation for years. The first one didn't work. Neither did the second or third. My heart sank with each failed attempt. She'd changed them all, but I wasn't ready to give up. Instead, I turned my attention to her phone. She'd left it charging on the kitchen counter, a rare moment of carelessness. I picked it up and hesitated. I knew her password. It hadn't changed in years, but typing it in felt like crossing a line I could never uncross. "Do it," a voice in my head whispered. "She's hiding something." My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I entered the code. The phone unlocked, and I was in. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Her texts were filled with mundane exchanges with friends and colleagues. But then I saw it. A thread marked James. With no last name or identifying photo. The messages were brief, cryptic even. "It's ready. We'll deliver tomorrow. The payment cleared. We're set for Friday. Don't use that number again." I scrolled further, my stomach tightening with each new message. There was nothing explicitly damning, but the tone was enough to set off alarms in my head. Who the hell was James? and what exactly was being delivered. I copied the number from the contact info and sent it to myself. Then I deleted the sent message from her phone, careful not to leave any trace. When I went to bed that night, Laura was already asleep, her face serene in the glow of the bedside lamp. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and wondering how much of the woman I married was real, and how much was a lie. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about that number. Who was James? A coworker? A client? Or something worse? Laura was cheerful as ever at breakfast, making her usual smoothie and humming to herself. I watched her closely, searching for any sign that she suspected I'd been snooping. But she was flawless, her movements relaxed, her demeanor calm. "Got a busy day today?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Always," she replied with a laugh. "Big client presentation this afternoon. Might run late again. Just a heads up." "Of course. Good luck." She kissed me on the cheek before heading out the door, her heels clicking against the tile. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my phone and called the number I'd saved from her contact list. It rang twice before going to voicemail. "James," a deep voice said, clipped and professional. "Leave a message." I hung up without saying anything. Next, I tried running a reverse search online. It didn't yield much, just that the number was registered to a burner phone. No name, no address, no real information. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to check her laptop again. She always took it to work, but her desktop computer in the home office was still there, untouched. The door was locked. I stared at it for a long time, my mind racing. She'd never locked that door before. What was so important that she needed to keep me out? I searched through the junk drawer in the kitchen, where we kept old keys and spare parts, and found what I was looking for. A small, thin tool I could use to jimmy the lock. It took a few tries, but eventually, the handle turned, and I was in. The office looked just as it always had, neatly organized, with stacks of papers on the desk and a few bookshelves lining the walls. But something felt staged, too perfect. I sat at the desk and turned on the computer. It booted up quickly, and just like her laptop, it was password protected. This time, I didn't even bother trying her old passwords. Instead, I pulled a USB stick from my pocket, a small hacking tool I'd bought years ago as a novelty, never thinking I'd actually need it. It took a while, but eventually, the screen unlocked, and I was in. At first, everything seemed normal. Emails, spreadsheets, work-related documents. But then I noticed a folder buried deep in the file system, labeled Simply Private. I clicked it open and my blood ran cold. Inside were dozens of documents and photos, most of them encrypted. But a few files were accessible: bank statements, travel itineraries, and even scanned IDs. Names I didn't recognize appeared alongside large sums of money. One photo caught my eye. Laura, standing next to a man in a sharp suit, his arm around her waist. They were both smiling, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at her. Possessive, almost predatory. The man was holding a briefcase. I copied everything onto my USB stick and shut down the computer, my heart pounding in my chest. I locked the door behind me and went back to the living room, trying to process what I just found. Who was that man? And what was Laura doing with him? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. My wife was hiding a life I knew nothing about. That night, I could barely look at Laura without feeling a wave of anger and confusion. She was her usual self, smiling, asking about my day, and chatting about the office drama. I played along, nodding and responding when necessary, but my mind was miles away, replaying the image of her standing beside that man with the briefcase. "You okay?" she asked, tilting her head. "You seem distracted." "Just work?" I lied again, forcing a smile. "Same old stuff." She gave me a sympathetic look but didn't press further. I wondered if she could sense my growing unease, or if she was just too confident in her ability to keep me in the dark. The next morning I called in sick. Laura had already left for work, so I spent the day going through the files I'd copied from her computer. Most of the documents were encrypted, as I'd expected, but a few gave me enough breadcrumbs to follow. One bank statement showed multiple large deposits from an offshore account. Money I couldn't account for in our regular finances. There were also scanned contracts and agreements, some bearing Laura's signature. The names on these documents were unfamiliar, but the sums involved were staggering. Millions of dollars were changing hands, and Laura was somehow in the middle of it. I knew I needed more context. I decided to reach out to an old friend, Ben, who worked in cybersecurity. He owed me a favor from years ago, and I hoped he could help me decrypt the files. When I called, he picked up on the first ring.
Adam.
Long time, man. What's up?
Hey, Ben.
I need your help with something sensitive. There was a pause. You're not in trouble, are you? Not me, I said quickly. At least I don't think so. It's about Laura. His tone shifted, becoming more serious. What's going on? I found some files on her computer. They're encrypted, but they look suspicious. Like offshore accounts and contracts with names I've never heard of. Can you take a look? Send them over, he said without hesitation. I'll see what I can do. I emailed the files and waited. The hours dragged on, and my mind raced with possibilities. Who was Laura really working with? And what was she hiding from me? Finally, Ben called back. Adam, he said, his voice tense. You need to be careful. This isn't just shady business. These files mention names tied to organized crime. Big players. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Like mobsters? Worse, he replied. International syndicates. Money laundering, arms deals, the works. And your wife's name is on some of these documents. I didn't know what to say. The woman I'd spent a decade with, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was somehow entangled in the darkest corners of the underworld. What do I do? I finally asked, my voice shaking. You lay low, Ben said firmly. Don't confront her yet. If she's involved with these people, they won't hesitate to protect their interests. You need to find out how deep this goes before you make a move. As I hung up the phone, a cold realization settled over me. Laura wasn't just hiding an affair or lying about her job. She was playing a dangerous game, one that could destroy both of us if I wasn't careful. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Laura's face, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. The juxtaposition between her warmth and the cold, calculated documents I'd uncovered made my head spin. The next morning, I pretended everything was fine. Laura left early as usual, claiming another packed day at the office. Once her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed my jacket and headed out. I wasn't sure where I was going at first, but I found myself drawn to the address listed on one of the itineraries I'd seen in the files. It was a warehouse on the outskirts of town, near the docks. I parked a block away and approached on foot, my heart pounding with every step. The building was unremarkable. Gray walls, no signage, and a single security camera perched above the entrance. I watched from a distance, pretending to check my phone as I leaned against a lamppost. A few minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. The man who stepped out was the same one from the photo, the man with the briefcase. He looked even more imposing in person, his sharp suit a stark contrast to the gritty surroundings. He was flanked by two others, both wearing dark sunglasses and carrying an air of menace. I ducked behind a dumpster as they entered the warehouse, my pulse racing. What the hell was Laura involved in? I waited for what felt like hours, but no one else came or went. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of a seagull or the distant hum of machinery. Finally, the SUV returned. The three men exited the warehouse, accompanied by a fourth figure, a woman. My breath caught. It was Laura. She was dressed in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, her hair neatly pinned back. She looked poised, confident, and completely at ease with these dangerous men. She laughed at something the man with the briefcase said, her smile radiant. It wasn't the smile she gave me. It was something else entirely. Something sharper, more deliberate. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, as she climbed into the SUV and drove away. By the time I returned home, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, fear. They all churned inside me, threatening to consume me. Laura came home late that night as she'd promised. She kissed me on the cheek and apologized for missing dinner, claiming her boss had needed her to stay late. "You work too hard," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed. "It's worth it. Just wait. This project is going to change everything for us." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Change everything? How? I didn't ask. Not yet. But I knew one thing for sure. The woman sitting across from me at the kitchen table wasn't the same woman I'd married, and I wasn't sure I'd ever really known her at all. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I couldn't stop replaying the scene at the warehouse in my mind. Laura, stepping out of that building, smiling like she belonged there. I wanted answers, but I knew Ben was right. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more information, something solid to figure out exactly how deep she was in. That week, I called in another favor. Mike, an old friend from college, worked as a private investigator. He was the type of guy who didn't ask too many questions, which was exactly what I needed. "Mike," I said when he picked up, "I've got a job for you. It's complicated." "When isn't it?" he replied with a chuckle. "What's the deal?" "It's Laura," I admitted, hating how the words sounded coming out of my mouth. "I think she's involved in something dangerous. I need to know where she's going, who she's meeting, everything." There was a long pause. "You sure about this, Adam? Once we go down this road, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "I need to know the truth." Mike agreed to start tailing Laura the next day. I tried to act normal when she came home that evening, but the cracks in my composure were starting to show. "You've been quiet lately," she said as we sat on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder. "Just stressed," I replied, forcing a smile. She looked up at me, her eyes soft. "You've been working too hard. Maybe we should take a weekend off. Get out of town, just the two of us." The suggestion caught me off guard. Was she trying to distract me? Or was it guilt? "That sounds nice," I said, even though the idea of spending a weekend alone with her felt like walking into a trap. She kissed me and went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The next few days were a blur. Mike sent me regular updates, each one adding to the growing pile of evidence against Laura. She wasn't just meeting clients at work. She was making stops at banks, private clubs, and secluded locations around the city. One photo he sent me stood out. Laura sitting at an upscale restaurant with the man from the warehouse. They were leaning in close, her hand on his arm. She looked completely at ease, laughing at something he'd said. "She's in deep," Mike said during one of our calls. "I don't know what her angle is, but this guy, he's bad news. His name's Vincent. He's tied to some serious players." "Players?" I asked, my throat tightening. "Organized crime," Mike replied grimly. "Money laundering, extortion, trafficking, you name it. If she's working with him, she's playing with fire." I sat in silence, my mind racing. Laura wasn't just keeping secrets. She was living a double life. "Adam," Mike said, his tone softer, "I don't know what your plan is, but be careful. People like this, they don't forgive, and they don't forget." As I hung up, I realized Mike was right. Whatever I did next, I had to be smart. Laura had betrayed me in ways I never thought possible, but if I made the wrong move, it wouldn't just be my heart on the line. It could be my life. The realization of how deep Laura was entangled with Vincent and his world shook me to my core. My wife wasn't just lying. She was involved with people who could destroy lives with a snap of their fingers. For the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I was the attentive husband, smiling at her jokes, listening to her stories, and even pretending to consider her weekend getaway suggestion. But every moment we spent together felt like a lie, and it tore me apart. Then, one night, Laura made the first misstep. I was sitting in the living room, flipping through channels, when her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She was in the shower, and for once, she hadn't brought it with her. I picked it up, telling myself I was only going to glance at the notification. But the message on the screen stopped me cold. "Vincent, the shipment is ready. We need to talk." Shipment? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Drugs? Weapons? People? I knew I couldn't open the message without her noticing, so I took a picture of the screen before setting the phone back down. When Laura came back, wrapped in a towel and humming to herself, she didn't even glance at her phone. But I watched her closely, waiting to see if she'd react. She didn't. The next day, I met with Mike again, showing him the photo of the text. "Shipment?" he said, frowning. "This is bad, Adam. Real bad. Can you find out what it is?" I asked. "I'll try," he replied. "But if it's tied to Vincent, it's going to be well hidden. These guys don't leave paper trails." While Mike worked on uncovering more, I began to notice other changes in Laura's behavior. She was more careful with her phone, checking it constantly and deleting messages. She also started staying out later, her excuses becoming thinner with every passing day. Finally, on Friday night, I decided to follow her. She left the house around 8 p.m., dressed in a sleek black dress that hugged her figure. She told me she was meeting a coworker for drinks, but I didn't buy it. I waited 5 minutes before grabbing my keys and heading out. Keeping my distance, I followed her car through the city until she pulled into the parking lot of an upscale hotel. My heart pounded as I watched her step out and head inside. I parked a block away and made my way to the lobby, careful to stay out of sight. Through the glass doors, I saw her enter the bar. She didn't sit down or order a drink. Instead, she walked straight to a private booth at the back, where Vincent was waiting for her. They talked for a few minutes, their expressions serious. At one point, he slid a small envelope across the table, and she slipped it into her purse without hesitation. When they stood to leave, I ducked behind a column, my pulse racing. Vincent placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her out of the bar and toward the elevators. I wanted to storm in, to confront her, to demand answers. But I knew I couldn't, not yet. Instead, I turned and walked away, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't ready to face. I barely slept that night, replaying what I had seen in the hotel lobby over and over in my mind. Laura, slipping an envelope into her purse, walking away with Vincent like they were partners or worse. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, kissed me on the cheek, and even suggested we order takeout for dinner later. I watched her like a hawk, studying her every move, every word, every glance. How could someone lie so effortlessly? How could she smile at me, knowing what she was doing behind my back? Mike called later that day with an update. "I found something," he said. His tone was grim. "What is it?" "There's a shipment scheduled to leave the docks tomorrow night. It's registered under a shell company tied to Vincent. The manifest says it's medical supplies, but I'm willing to bet it's not." "What do you think it is?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Could be anything: drugs, weapons, even people. Whatever it is, it's big. They've paid off a lot of people to keep it quiet. And Laura? She's tied to it," Mike confirmed. "I don't know how deep, but her name's come up in a few conversations I've overheard." I felt like the ground was crumbling beneath me. My wife wasn't just tangled in this mess. She was actively involved. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You need to decide if you want to bring this to the authorities," Mike said. "But be careful. If Vincent or his people find out you're snooping, they won't think twice about silencing you." After hanging up, I sat in silence for what felt like hours. I couldn't go to the police, not yet. I didn't have enough evidence, and I wasn't ready to expose Laura. Instead, I decided to confront her in a way that wouldn't immediately tip my hand. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I casually brought up her job. "You've been working a lot of late nights lately," I said. "What's this big project you've been working on?" She froze for a split second, her fork hovering in midair. But then she smiled and shrugged. "Just a new client. High stakes, but worth it if we land them." "Must be pretty demanding," I pressed. "You've been spending a lot of time out of the office, too." Her smile faltered, just for a moment. "Some meetings have to happen off-site. You know how it is, corporate politics." I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She was lying, and she knew I was suspicious. Later that night, while she was in the shower, I checked her purse. The envelope she'd taken from Vincent was gone, but I found something else. A receipt from the hotel bar, dated the night before. Her signature was scrawled across the bottom, along with a hefty tip. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. I put the receipt back where I found it and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. Laura was in deep, too deep, and whatever she was involved in, it was dangerous. For the first time, I felt the stirrings of something darker than anger or hurt, a desire for retribution. The following night, I drove to the docks. I had to see this shipment for myself, to confirm Laura's involvement. The area was quiet, the warehouses lit only by the occasional flickering street lamp. I parked at a safe distance and crept closer, sticking to the shadows. A group of men was unloading crates from a truck onto a ship. Among them was Vincent and Laura. She wasn't dressed like she was there for business. In black jeans and a leather jacket, she looked like she belonged among them, directing their movements with sharp gestures. I stayed hidden, watching as the crates were loaded onto the ship. One of them fell, the lid cracking open to reveal rows of rifles. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just illegal, it was catastrophic. Laura glanced around, her sharp eyes scanning the area. I ducked behind a container, my heart racing. She was too close to this world, too comfortable. When the last crate was loaded, Vincent handed Laura a briefcase. She opened it briefly, revealing stacks of cash. They exchanged a few words before she walked toward her car, Vincent watching her with a satisfied smile. I waited until she drove away before retreating to my car. My wife wasn't just complicit. She was essential to this operation. And now I had proof. When Laura came home that night, I was waiting for her in the living room. She looked surprised to see me still up. "Late night again?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Yeah," she replied, slipping off her jacket. "Client meeting ran over. You know how it is." I forced a smile. "Must have been exhausting." She gave a tight nod and headed toward the kitchen, but I couldn't hold back anymore. "Laura," I called, my voice firmer. "Who's Vincent?" She froze mid-step, her back to me. For a moment, I thought she might deny everything. But when she turned around, her expression wasn't shocked. It was cold, calculating. "How do you know that name?" she asked quietly. "I saw you," I admitted, "at the docks. I know what you're doing." Her face hardened, and she stepped closer. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't insult me," I snapped, standing up. "I saw the guns, Laura. I saw you with him." Her mask cracked, just for a moment. But then she straightened, her expression unreadable. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low. "This isn't about us. It's bigger than you or me." "Bigger than our marriage, you mean?" I shot back. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. As I sat back down, the realization hit me like a freight train. Laura wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to change. And if I wanted to bring her down, I'd have to play her game. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had a plan. Laura's arrogance was her weakness. She thought she was untouchable, that I'd never act against her. She was wrong. First, I called Mike. "I need everything you've got on Vincent and Laura," I said. "And I need it fast." "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "I've never been more sure." Over the next few days, I gathered evidence. Photos, bank statements, shipping manifests, and even audio recordings Mike had intercepted. It painted a damning picture of Laura's role in Vincent's operations. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to Ben, asking him to create a fake document, a contract tying Laura to a deal Vincent hadn't authorized. It was risky, but it would plant a seed of doubt in Vincent's mind. The final piece of the puzzle was an anonymous tip to law enforcement. I gave them just enough to spark an investigation, ensuring they'd be watching when everything fell apart. The night I set the plan in motion, Laura left the house as usual. I stayed behind, waiting for the call I knew would come. Around midnight, Mike's voice came through the line. "It's happening. Vincent found the fake contract." He's furious. My heart pounded as he continued. He thinks Laura's been working behind his back. They're meeting at the warehouse. Perfect, I said, gripping the phone tightly. Keep eyes on them. The police should be there soon. An hour later, Mike sent a text. Cops just raided the place. They've got Vincent and his crew. And Laura? I asked, calling him immediately. She wasn't at the warehouse, he replied. But they'll find her. She's tied to this now. I hung up and leaned back, the weight of what I'd done sinking in. Laura's world was crumbling, and she didn't even know it yet. Laura stormed into the house the next morning, her face pale and her hands trembling. I was sitting in the living room, waiting for her. What the hell did you do? She demanded, slamming her purse onto the table. I feigned confusion. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Adam, she snapped. Vincent's operation was raided last night. He thinks I set him up. I stood, my expression cold. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's time someone exposed what you've been doing. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought I saw fear. But then her face hardened. You don't know what you've done. They'll come after me, and you. No, I said, stepping closer. They'll come after you. I made sure of that. She stared at me, her composure crumbling. You bastard. You brought this on yourself, Laura, I said quietly. You destroyed everything we had. Now you'll face the consequences. She said nothing, just grabbed her purse and stormed out. I watched her leave, knowing it was only a matter of time before the police found her. My wife's betrayal had finally caught up with her, and I had made sure she couldn't escape. 2 days later, it was all over the news. Authorities have dismantled a major arms trafficking operation. The anchor reported, her tone steady. Several high-profile arrests were made, including Vincent DeLuca, a notorious figure in organized crime. Sources confirm that Laura Hartley, a key associate, is also in custody. I turned off the TV and sat back, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over me. Laura's mugshot had flashed across the screen for the world to see. Mike called shortly after. She's done, Adam. They have enough evidence to bury her. She'll be in prison for a long time. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Thanks, Mike, for everything. She made her choices, he said. You just made sure the right people found out. When I hung up, I looked around the house. It felt empty, like a shell of the life we'd built together. But I knew this was the price of freedom, the cost of her betrayal. That evening, I drove to the warehouse one last time, standing in the shadows where I'd first seen her with Vincent. The air was heavy, the silence oppressive. I took a deep breath and walked away, leaving the memories behind. Weeks passed, and the dust began to settle. Laura's trial was swift. Her involvement in Vincent's operation was undeniable, thanks to the evidence I'd collected. She was sentenced to 15 years without parole. I didn't attend the trial. I couldn't bring myself to face her again, not after everything. Life slowly began to take shape again. I sold the house and moved to a quieter town, far from the chaos Laura had brought into my life. Mike and Ben checked in occasionally, but I preferred to be alone, sorting through the wreckage of my trust. One day a letter arrived. It was from Laura, written from prison.
Adam.
I know you were the one who destroyed me. I don't know how you found out, but you were smarter than I thought. Smarter than I gave you credit for. But you should know this, you didn't just betray me. You betrayed the part of me that once loved you. I hope it was worth it. I burned the letter without replying. As I watched the flames consume her words, I realized something. I wasn't the same man who had trusted her with my heart. I was stronger now. Laura had built her life on lies, and I had dismantled it, piece by piece. My revenge had been cruel, but it had also been just. And as I stood there, watching the ashes scatter, I finally felt free.